Welcome back to the deep dive. It's great to have you with us. We spend a lot of time on the show talking about the what. We'll talk about what's happening in technology or what happened in history or, what a new psychological theory says. But today, I kind of want to shift gears and look at the how.
Mhm.
Specifically, I want to look at the invisible scaffolding that holds up something we usually think of as purely emotional.
It's a great pivot
Hmm.
because when we think about mental health support, we usually picture a very intimate, almost improvised setting.
Hmm.
Two people in chairs, a box of
The
tissues.
clock ticking on the wall.
Right. It feels organic. It feels like it's just about human connection.
Exactly. It feels like the result of intuition, empathy. But if you actually pull back the curtain, effective mental health care isn't just vibes, it's engineering.
It really is.
There's a rigorous, almost architectural science to building these programs. And if you don't have that blueprint, all the empathy in the world might not actually help people get better.
That is the hard truth of the field. Without structure, helping is just good intentions. And, well, good intentions don't always equal good outcomes. So to understand how professionals actually build these systems, we're looking at a text by Ed Neutrug and Janelle Franklin.
Yeah, developing and evaluating mental health programs.
Exactly.
And what I appreciate about this source is that it doesn't stay in the abstract. It walks us through a 6-step process for building a program from scratch. But to keep us from, falling asleep with dry theory, we are going to follow the specific case study they use.
Which is a great one.
It's a hypothetical program designed for a very specific, very complex group, adults with borderline personality disorder or BPD.
It's a fascinating choice for a case study because BPD is notoriously difficult to treat. I mean, it creates a very high-stakes environment for program developers. If your program is flimsy, these clients won't just be bored. They could be in real danger.
So I want to start with the why here. The text lays out some statistics on BPD that, frankly, they surprised me. I knew it was a serious diagnosis, but the prevalence numbers really highlight why you need a specialized program, not just general therapy.
The numbers tell a story of resource intensity. In the general American population, BPD affects fewer than 2% of people. So walking down the street, it's relatively rare.
Sure, seems low.
But, and this is the key, if you look at the inpatient psychiatric population, so people who are hospitalized because they are in crisis, BPD patients make up 20%.
20%. Wow, that is a massive disproportion. You go from this tiny fraction of the general
A
public
tiny fraction.
to 1 in 5 hospital beds.
It creates a huge strain on the system. And interestingly, nearly half of those diagnosed, about 42%, actively seek treatment. So you have this specific group that is suffering intensely, using a lot of emergency resources, and is clearly asking for help.
Which makes them the perfect candidate for step 1 of this whole architectural process, identifying the target population. You can't just build a mental health workshop for everyone.
No, that's like trying to build a vehicle that's both a submarine and a race car. You got to be specific to be effective. But even adults with BPD is a massive label.
Right.
You try to fix BPD in a 6-week workshop, you're setting yourself up to fail. The disorder is just too complex.
Which brings us to step 2, and this is where that engineering mindset really kicks in. The text calls it operationalizing the problem.
It's a term that sounds very clinical, but it's so crucial. Operationalizing means taking a vague, giant concept and slicing it down into a specific addressable behavior that you can actually measure and change.
So instead of trying to overhaul their entire personality structure, you pick one loose screw and just focus on tightening that one.
In a way, yeah.
Huh?
In this case study, they decide to focus on emotional dysregulation.
Which is the engine driving so much of the chaos. The text lists the symptoms from the DSM-5 frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, unstable relationships, impulsivity, chronic feelings of emptiness. All of those really stem from that core inability to regulate emotion.
Right. So if the program designers say, okay, we are going to operationalize the problem as emotional dysregulation, they are giving themselves a winnable battle. They aren't promising to cure the patient. They are promising to help them manage the spikes in their emotional graph.
It turns a disorder into a project. And once you've narrowed that down, you move to step 3, goals and objectives. This felt like a ladder to me. You have to climb one rung to get to the next.
It's a progression.
Yeah.
Goal 1 is purely educational. Do the participants even understand what emotional dysregulation is? Do they get the genetic and environmental factors involved?
Which is huge, because I think a lot of people just think I'm crazy. They don't know there's a mechanism at work.
Knowledge reduces shame. Once you have that, you move to application learning techniques to lessen the dysregulation. And then finally, maintenance. How do you keep using these tools 6 months from now?
So we have the target, the specific problem, and the definition of success. Now comes step 4, designing strategies. This is the what happens in the room part. And I was interested to see it wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just a lecture, and it wasn't just a...
A share your feelings circle.
Yeah.
It has to be a mix because you're trying to hit different parts of the brain.
Okay, so how do they do that?
Well, strategy 1 is a 90-minute didactic presentation using the DSM-5-KR, that's for the intellect, that hits the knowledge goal.
But you can't lecture someone out of an emotional crisis.
No, of course not. So they layer in a 2-hour workshop where people share personal stories. That hits the emotional connection. It breaks the isolation. And then, crucially, they have group counseling specifically for skill building.
Like what?
Mindfulness and meditation. That's the muscle memory part. So you have the theory, the emotion, and the practice.
It's a triangulation.
It's a built environment for change. If you only had the lecture, they'd be smart but unstable. If you only had the sharing, they'd feel supported but unskilled. You need all 3 pillars.
That makes so much sense. It feels robust. But here's where the text pivots, and I think this is where the science part really proves itself. You've built this beautiful program, you're running the workshops, the participants seem engaged. How do you know it's actually working?
This is step 5, developing evaluation techniques. And honestly, this is the part that scares a lot of practitioners. It forces you to look at data that might tell you your baby is ugly.
The text distinguishes between 2 types of evaluation here, formative and summative. And they use this kitchen analogy that's simple, but it really clarifies the difference.
It's the classic chef versus guest scenario.
Yeah.
Formative evaluation is like the chef tasting the soup while it's still in the pot.
The process is ongoing. You can still change the outcome.
Precisely. You taste it, you realize it's bland, and you add more salt. In our BPD program, this means checking in during the process. Maybe you notice the participants are glazing over during that 90-minute lecture.
Right.
That's a formative data point. You realize, okay, this is too long, we need to break it up. You steer the ship while it's moving.
And summative evaluation?
Summative is when the guests eat the soup and pay the bill. The event is over. You are measuring the final result. Did the program achieve those goals we set back in step 3? It's about the final verdict.
And it's usually about the money.
Always about the money. Grant committees and hospital boards don't care how the soup tasted while you were cooking it. They want to know if the customers were satisfied at the end. They want the summative report.
But capturing that data is tricky. We aren't measuring blood pressure here. We're measuring emotional stability. The text lists a whole toolkit for this, and some of it is standard, but some of it is surprisingly aggressive.
You have to be creative to measure the invisible. The most basic tool is asking for feedback. Just simple survey. But there's a trap there, right? The halo effect, or just simple politeness.
Oh, for sure. If I've just spent 6 weeks crying in a room with a therapist who was nice to me, I'm not going to give them a bad review.
You're going to lie. You're going to say it was great because you like the person, not because the program worked. So the text suggests using more objective measures to cut through that niceness. One of them is quizzes.
Which sounds a bit condescending for adults, right? Okay, everyone, pencils down.
It does, but you have to reframe the purpose. The text makes a brilliant point here. The quiz isn't to test the client. It's to test the presenter.
Oh, that's a great distinction.
If 90% of the room fails the quiz on genetic factors of BPD, the clients aren't stupid. The teacher failed to teach. It puts the accountability back on the architects.
I like that. Then you have the scales. The Likert scale, your standard 1 to 5 agreement chart, and the rank order scale.
I love rank order scales for this because they force a hard choice. If you ask people, did you like the mindfulness? They say yes. Did you like the lecture? They say yes. But if you say, rank these 4 activities in order of helpfulness, you suddenly see the truth.
Ah, yeah.
Maybe the lecture consistently falls to the bottom. That tells you where to cut your budget next time.
But the evaluation tool that really stopped me, the one that feels the most fraught with tension, is what they call the spouse observer factor.
Oh yeah, this is the third rail of evaluation.
You're asking the client's husband, wife, or roommate to fill out a form on the client's progress. Is she engaging in fewer arguments? Is he practicing his mindfulness?
It's incredibly high stakes. Think about it. You are introducing an external judge into a very private therapeutic process.
And you're dealing with a population that's defined by unstable relationships.
Exactly. You might be handing a grading rubric to a partner who is part of the problem. But, and here's the dilemma, it is also the most accurate data you will ever get. A client might think they're being calm. They might self-report a 10 out of 10 on emotional regulation. But the spouse is the one living in the blast radius. If the spouse says, actually nothing has changed, that is a data point you cannot ignore.
It's the difference between how we see ourselves and how the world sees us. Okay, so let's say we've navigated that minefield. We've gathered the quizzes, the rankings, the spouse reports. We are at step 6, analysis and decision-making.
This is the verdict. You look at the pile of evidence and you decide, do we keep the program? Do we modify it? Or do we kill it?
And then you have to tell the story of that decision, the reporting phase. The text mentions that the executive summary is probably the only thing the higher-ups will actually read.
It's a cynical but necessary tip. The clinical director is busy. They aren't reading 50 pages of nuanced findings. They're reading the 2-page summary. So you have to be punchy, and you have to be honest about the numbers, especially attrition.
Attrition rates, the number of people who quit.
It's the metric nobody wants to talk about. If you start with 50 people and end with 5, your program is a failure.
Even if those 5 people had a miracle cure.
Even then, because you lost 90% of the people you were trying to help. High attrition usually means the program was too demanding, too boring, or maybe too offensive. It's a massive red flag that the architecture is broken.
So we've built the machine, we've tested it, we've reported the findings. But listening to all this, the quizzes, the spouse reports, the tracking, it starts to feel a little invasive. We are poking and prodding some very vulnerable people.
And that is why we cannot finish this discussion without talking about ethics. The text is very clear. Program development isn't just a logistical puzzle, it's a moral activity. You are intervening in human lives.
There are 6 core principles listed here: autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, fidelity, veracity. I mean, they sound like a code of chivalry, but they get really messy in practice.
They do. Take the principle of non-maleficence. Do no harm. Now, combine that with the evaluation we just talked about. As a researcher, I want to ask you deep, probing questions to measure your progress. I want to ask, how many times did you think about self-harm this week?
Because you need the data.
I need the data to prove the program works. But asking that question is a risk. It could trigger the client. It could send them into a spiral.
So you have a conflict between the need for evidence and the safety of the patient.
Precisely. The text says you have to constantly weigh the risks versus benefits. And if you do ask those hard questions, you need safety nets. You need mitigation strategies. You can't just drop a heavy question and walk away.
They even mention using incentives like food or gift certificates, which I thought was interesting. It's acknowledging that giving feedback is labor. It costs the client something emotionally.
It's a transaction. You need to respect that.
There was one other ethical landmine that really stood out to me. Confidentiality in groups. We always assume what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas with therapy.
In individual therapy, that's easy to enforce. The therapist keeps their mouth shut. But in our BPD workshop, you have 10 strangers in a room.
You can tell them to keep secrets, but
they are professionals. The leader cannot guarantee that participant A won't go home and tell their partner about participant B's breakdown. The text calls this a limit of confidentiality. You have to be honest with the group up front. I will keep your secrets, but I cannot control everyone else here.
it's terrifying. But I guess it's the price of admission for the community aspect. And even on the paperwork side, we talked about anonymity.
True anonymity is almost a myth in small programs. If I hand out a confidential survey to 12 people, and one of them writes a comment about a specific fight they had with their mother, I know who wrote it.
Or even just recognizing handwriting.
Exactly. So you have to be careful not to promise anonymity when all you can really offer is confidentiality. One means I don't know who you are. The other means I know but I won't tell. The huge difference for trust.
Finally, we have the legal layer, IPPA, which protects the data, and the IRB.
The Institutional Review Board. If you are doing federally funded research or publishing your results, you answer to them. They are the ultimate safety net. You have to submit your entire plan to a board of ethics experts who review it to ensure you aren't violating human rights. It stops the mad scientist scenario before it starts.
So stepping back from all of this, we started by saying mental health programs look simple, just people talking in a room. But what we've uncovered is this massive hidden structure. You have the statistical analysis, the operationalizing of symptoms, the strategic layering of workshops, the constant taste testing of evaluation, and then the ethical guardrails keeping it all on the road.
It really reframes the whole experience. It shows that mental health care is an evidence-based discipline. It's not just caring, it's calculation. And I mean that in the best possible way.
It has to be calculated, because if you get it wrong, the consequences are real.
If a bridge collapses because of bad engineering, it's a tragedy. If a mental health program fails a vulnerable person because of bad design, that is also a tragedy. So the architecture has to be just as sound.
That's a powerful image, but I want to leave us with a thought that kind of challenges everything we just said.
What's that?
We talked a lot about summative evaluation, the hard data, the quizzes, the rankings, the attrition rates.
Proof.
Right. But imagine this scenario. You run this BPD program, you get to the end, the clinical data says there was no significant change, the dysregulation scores are flat, the spouse reports say same old behavior. On paper, the program failed.
Okay.
But the participants loved it. They gave it 5 stars. They felt heard. They felt a sense of community they hadn't felt in years. They begged for it to continue.
That is the ultimate paradox of this work.
So which metric wins? Does the hard data outweigh the human experience? Or is the feeling of being helped a valid clinical outcome in itself, even if the symptoms didn't move?
In an evidence-based world, we tend to worship the data. We want to see the needle move. But mental health is subjective. If someone feels hope for the first time, even if their score hasn't changed, can you really call that a failure? I don't know if we have a clear answer for that.
Yeah. It's the tension between the science and the soul. And it's a fascinating place to leave it. Thank you for guiding us through the blueprint today.
My pleasure.
And thank you to everyone listening. Next time you walk past a community center or a clinic, remember the invisible architecture holding it all up. This has been The Deep Dive. Stay curious.